It's Fully Threaded Radio, Unthreaded.
This Unthreaded edition of the Fully Threaded Radio podcast is a conversation with Marco Rodriguez of Cressa Expert Real Estate Advisors. Hi, everyone. Eric Dudas with you again. Regular listeners to the podcast know that Marco has been dropping in his commercial real estate updates for the last several episodes, and he's sharing his knowledge and developing wisdom with the fastener industry in hopes that you'll think of him next time a real estate issue comes your way, specifically when it comes to finding some new space for your distribution or manufacturing operation. As you'll hear, along with the vast team he's connected with, Marco is building up a real knowledge base in this area, and he has serious fastener industry credentials, as you'll hear. It's a good conversation, and you'll get to know the voice behind the commercial real estate update a lot better. The title sponsors of Fully Threaded Radio are Linfast Solutions Group and Bright & Best International. Fully Threaded Radio is also sponsored by Buckeye Fasteners, BTM Manufacturing, Eurolink, Fastener Supply Service, Cressa, Fastener Technology International, Fastener Fair USA, Global Fasteners, InSequel Software, J-Lan Franco, MW Components, Solution Industries, Volt Industrial Plastics, and Worth Industry USA. I will drop a link to Marco's LinkedIn profile in the show notes for this episode if you want to reach out to him. He's easy to catch and a good guy to have in your Rolodex. We make a couple of references to Vegemite during this episode, and for anyone who's not plugged into that little joke, we use our little Vegemite sample packs as a marketing device at the trade shows we hit with FCH Sourcing Network. So we've had a lot of fun with Marco over the years talking about that. He, for whatever reason, caught the vibe on that one. All right, here's my conversation with Marco Rodriguez of Cressa. Marco, you're rapidly becoming the voice to go to in the fastener industry for advice on commercial real estate. Thanks for being here.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate you, someone wanting to hear what I have to say.
You've always got very perceptive questions. You know, whenever you would come up to the booth, Brian and I would be in Vegas or whatever show we're at, you know, you always seem to understand what we're going through at the moment. And you ask us about, and I'm talking specifically about your suggestions on the marketing angle, you know, how we use Vegemite as our foil with all that. You picked right up on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd spent almost 20 years in the fastener industry, and when I left to get into real estate, you kind of see it from the outside and you pick up on perspective. So I'm always looking for different ways to market and get people's attention. And so I like the Vegemite take, and I have younger children, so I know what they're doing on social media. And I thought there was an angle there. You guys can leverage video and humor to capitalize on the Vegemite connection.
Yeah, I'm still flirting with the whole video thing. It's a big beast in the cage that I haven't let out yet, but I think you're right on that. Well, anyway, so after all these conversations and stuff, you're working with us on Fully Threaded last several episodes. I really like the short segments that you do. They're really informative, and I know you bust these things out about. It's kind of like Carmen doing the Fastener Training Minute, really. You kind of look out there, see what's relevant. So a lot of topics going on in real estate these days. It's a tumultuous economy. It's a tumultuous world, really. And you're right out there.
Well, Carmen and Mike McNulty set the bar very high with their segment. So I feel like I need to step up my game, and they do a fantastic job providing nuggets of information. I'm hoping that one or two listeners benefit from what I have to share.
Let's dig into kind of a provocative subject right out of the gate here, Marco.
Absolutely.
Data centers are everything in the news these days. First of all, they're going up everywhere, and they have these enormous power requirements and also enormous, apparently, fresh water requirements for their cooling systems and everything. And so in the headlines that I'm reading, you know, you see different municipalities, and they're arguing over how this is going to affect the communities that they're going into. And there's all kinds of ideas about where to place them and so forth. But one thing's for sure, this is a major force out there. How is that, as far as you could see it, impacting fastener warehousing operations or even office operations that you're dealing with?
It is a major topic. And one thing is for sure, there's just so much money behind these data centers. I think it's an unstoppable force. I mean, companies like Amazon and OpenAI, Facebook, they're not going to stop building these things. So it'll be an ongoing fight. But I'm certain that there's enough capital and pressure behind them that it's inevitable that they'll pop up everywhere. Luckily, you rightly pointed out that the biggest factor determining their location is availability of power. And I mean, we're not talking megawatts of power. We're talking about gigawatts of power. And so they are often in really remote areas where power sources tend to be, just like nuclear power plants. Nuclear power plants tend to be far from homes and industrial commercial centers. Wind farms tend to be kind of out and about in remote areas. So data centers need to be close to the sources of power. And luckily, those are not typically competing with warehouses, manufacturing locations. I mean, if it's intense heavy manufacturing, it might because, let's say, someone making solar panels or steel, they do require a lot of power. But the objection seems to come more from environmentalists worried about the water consumption. And then, of course, just your everyday consumer worrying that data centers are going to be driving up power prices.
So I'm taking it from that response that you're not really seeing any impact yet on any of the conversations you're having with the fastener world.
Well, interestingly, the data centers themselves don't compete for space with fastener distributors. Someone described it to me as the modern gold rush. There's such a race to build these data centers that the suppliers to the data centers are making a killing. Everybody from the large high voltage transformers to the racking, the data racks that house all the servers, the cooling systems, refrigeration system or cooling systems, cabling. There's just an enormous list of suppliers to the data centers that are making a killing. And since there is a race to be the first, when someone like Google calls for pricing, they don't really care how much that stuff costs. It's really how quickly can you produce it, and can I get to the front of the line ahead of someone like Facebook? And so, what we're seeing more are the suppliers competing for space, the distributors of equipment needing space very quickly and fairly large amounts of it.
Oh, yeah, I can totally see that. I mean, these operations are just cropping up overnight and they need huge amounts of resources to go up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, these are really large spaces that the suppliers to the data centers use. I mean, we're talking 500,000 square foot, 1,000,000 square feet. We at Cressa have worked with some of these companies to find very large spaces. And with a few exceptions, fastener companies don't use, whether you're a manufacturer or a distributor, they don't have spaces that large. I mean, just thinking some of the large fastener distributors or importers, they might have 300, 500,000 square foot space. So again, kind of the data centers and their suppliers are they're playing in a different league with the fastener industry. I would fathom to say that most fastener distributors are probably in smaller buildings, a 20 to 50,000 square foot building. And certainly some of the more remote locations might be in a 5,000 square foot building.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. My thought was really more along the lines of the competition for the resources. I don't know that this is all fleshing out yet. I think it's just sort of a specter on the horizon, but I see it in all the headlines. I don't have any direct interaction with it, so I'm just asking. Okay, well, how about let's move to another controversial subject right now, and that's the move away from a lot of these West Coast ghost cities like Portland, Seattle, and so forth. I've talked to several distributors over the years who, I mean, I don't know how else to say it. They fled those cities because it just got unmanageable for them, unworkable where they were. Those guys are splitting. So is anybody moving into those places or are they just ghost towns now?
I wouldn't. I mean, I wouldn't say ghost towns. Any of your listeners would tell you fasteners are used everywhere, and so maybe demand has dropped off a little bit. But there's still a decent manufacturing base up in the Northwest. I'm thinking of a few companies that um, are looking to expand in those areas. Where you're seeing a lot of flight are from the downtown areas, and that has impacted office primarily. I would say industrial demand has held pretty consistently across the board. Of course, it's grown in states like Texas and the Southwest. Phoenix had a big boom in industrial demand. But as it relates to our industry, I'm curious to see what some of your fastener distributor would say. But I would say industrial demand's held fairly strong. There's not a whole lot of fastener consumption in any major metro downtown, whether it's Dallas, Texas, or Portland, or downtown LA. They tend to be in industrial pockets and manufacturing pockets.
So you're not getting a lot of calls, though, for guys that are wanting to move into those areas, I'm gathering.
No.
They're the hot markets that you were talking about on your last installment, I guess.
Yeah, the good thing about fasteners is I haven't heard too many stories of homeless people breaking into fastener warehouses to steal some grade 8 or hex head cap screws. It's not a high value commodity that they can easily fence like copper wire.
Yeah, there are other problems, but I take your point. You talked to Rick Peterson about that. You remember him?
No, I'm sorry. Who's Rick Peters?
He sold his business a couple of years ago, but yeah, he had some interesting tales to tell about that area. Okay, well, we won't dwell on it. You keep bringing up the fastener industry, and we're talking about real estate. Okay, the overview here, really, and let's just give a little bit of insight into people who might be coming into this without really knowing you that well, and the bridge that you had to get from fasteners, which you understand deeply, into real estate, which makes you such a good person to talk to about looking for space. How did you make this transition?
Well, it's a interesting story. It was kind of made for me partially. I had been in the fastener industry starting in early 2000s, working for, at the time, what was GE Supply. That was a company that was acquired by GE. It was formerly Questron. And I spent a number of years there. That company later became Gexpro Services. Afterwards, I worked at Lone Star Fasteners in Houston, got into the oil and gas fastener industry.
Were you doing sales at this time?
At Gexpro, I was we called it a vertical leader. So that meant kind of a P&L responsibility for everything related to the energy industry. So it was essentially a business leader. And of course, like any business leader, you never give up sales. So I was working with companies like GE and wind turbine manufacturers, gas turbine manufacturers, all sorts of large diameter exotic metal fasteners that we sold to OEMs primarily. And then I took a role as the managing director of Lone Star Fasteners, based in Houston. And the oil and gas fasteners is kind of a different world. They use different, a lot of studs, a lot of 2H nuts. I'm sure people are familiar with them, but it's just a different demand model. It's all kind of made to order, or there's very little predictability. It's largely influenced by oil prices. So when oil prices are high, people are buying fasteners like crazy. And when oil prices drop, like they did in 2015, demand dries up as well. Well, I tell you all of this because I then went to work for Worth, a fantastic German company. And I was about 49 years old, and the company restructured. My role was eliminated, and I had to make a career decision. Did I want to find another job in the fastener industry or do something completely different? And real estate had always been attractive to me. I very quickly discovered I was terrible at selling houses, and I sold none, as a matter of fact. But luckily, someone pointed out to me that there was a whole nother side of real estate called commercial real estate, and I had spent an entire career inside of warehouses, manufacturing plants, and distribution centers. So I quickly took to that, and that was really an area where I felt at home.
Found your groove.
I found my groove. That's a better way to say it, perhaps.
Well, you don't really have the hair for residential.
I don't like to do the spray tans or either. So it puts me at a disadvantage.
All right, so now you're in the smash mouth world of commercial, and you got a captive market with fasteners because you know it so intimately.
Yeah, you spend 20 years in the industry, you meet a lot of people, and what your show's confirmed is how important relationships are. We're an industry that's not terribly known for turnover. And so, luckily, a lot of the people that I worked with, interacted with, whether they were customers or suppliers, were still in the industry. And I was able to connect with them, understand the problems from their perspective, which is rare in real estate. I wasn't trying to push buildings or force anybody to move. I understood what the challenges they're facing, whether it's contracts with their customers, quickly rising rents post COVID, unrealistic landlord expectations, et cetera, et cetera. I was able to understand their language and offer an informed perspective.
One of the things I like about your real estate updates that you've been doing is just the deep strategy that you offer. It's obvious that you've thought about it a lot. When I play these things, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I never really thought about it that way, but you've accumulated a lot of wisdom over your time doing this, and I really admire it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Prior to getting into real estate, I never really thought about it. I didn't realize there were all these little specialties. Like just like in fasteners, you've got specialties. You've got people that focus exclusively on stainless fasteners or metric fasteners or fasteners for the construction industry. Similarly, in commercial real estate, there's people that focus either on a specific geography or maybe data centers, what we just talked about. At my company, one of the things that attracted me to go work for them is they exclusively represent tenants. And so we never take the landlord's perspective. And the people that I've met in this industry, they've been working here for 20 years. They have amazing strategies, amazing ideas, proven tricks, I'm going to call it, or tactics, that when we negotiate with landlords on our clients' behalf, we're able to get good outcomes. I didn't invent these. I'm still consider myself a rookie in this industry, but when I work with people who have supported our clients, these are national clients for years, they've seen everything. And so I can just kind of pick their brain and say, hey, what would you do in this situation? And they've, 9 times out of 10, they've got way better ideas than I could ever come up with.
Right, right. So in your experience so far, what have you discovered about the unique needs of the fastener industry, or let's just say wholesale distribution kind of operations?
Yeah, that's a good distinction. I mean, to some extent, fasteners are unique, but it's not uncommon. Electrical distribution faces many of the same problems, hose distributors. So the industrial distribution as a whole has many of the similar situations. What we see is similar to what people are complaining about: home affordability. There's been very large, powerful Wall Street-backed groups buying up large swaths of warehousing. So as an example, Prologis is the world's largest industrial landlord. They have a tremendous amount of leverage. They own more warehouses than anybody, and that gives them somewhat of a monopoly. If you're in a market that you need to renew your lease and you're paying, let's say, $5 a year per square foot, and Prologis now says your rent is $9, you have limited leverage in pushing back on that. What I've learned is it's important to get ahead of the lease expiration and not be at the whim of these institutional landlords. And whether it's us or somebody else, get assistance, get market intelligence so you know how best to negotiate. Know what the market is at, know what landlords are willing to give and what they're not willing to give. But most of the time, landlords have the advantage because they're larger and they can live with you leaving and that building being 6 months vacant. So you've got to build a strategy, get ahead of it, and know what your options are so that you don't just have to take what they give you.
Do you have any kind of a feel for, in the fastener industry, what the breakdown would be for companies that own their building versus lease it?
Oh, that's a very good question. I'd say it really depends on the size of the company. So even in our industry, in the fastener industry, there's been consolidation, right? Maybe 10, 20 years ago, most of these distributors were individually owned or family owned. And today they've been rolled up into bigger companies. Some of them have been bought by private equity. Um, Private equity and corporate clients, they tend to lease because it's a better use of their capital. They prefer to reinvest the capital that they might have tied up in a building in their business. Private equity definitely doesn't like to own buildings. But smaller companies that are owned by an individual owner or family, they think about it differently. They think about building generational wealth, and they tend to own their buildings. When they sell those companies, sometimes they retain the buildings and then lease them back to the buyer. But honestly, I don't know if there's a hard number, what percentage. Someone even asked me how many fastener companies there are. I don't think I'd be able to come up with a number.
Yeah, there's a good one. And whatever there are, there's going to be less in about, a month.
Yeah. Yeah. I look on LinkedIn and it seems like every other week, so-and-so company's getting acquired.
Yeah. Every now and then you see somebody putting their shingle out, starting up something new, but mostly it's going the other way.
Yeah, it's tough to compete as a small guy now to put your shingle out, and you have to have significant volumes, and there's added complexity of tariffs and go. I mean, you have to have some purchasing power to get the best deal, not just from the overseas manufacturers, but the shipping lines, overseas freight, domestic carriers. I mean, I think it's gone are the days where you could just be a one-man show and work from your home and make a decent living.
Now, on the other hand, having said that, when we're thinking about these boom bust cycles, and you were talking about oil and gas earlier, you were also mentioning Texas earlier. So there's a huge overlap there, of course, because when oil gas goes crazy, which it seems to do periodically, you see all these little stud manufacturers and things pop up. Those are the guys that you might be looking to work with, aren't they?
Yeah, I remember running into some old colleagues at one of the fastener shows. I said, "What are you doing here? Like, I thought you were out of the fastener industry." I said, "Well," and I asked them, "Do you have four walls and a roof?" And of course, the answer is yes. Everybody needs this. So absolutely, we work with companies that as they start out, everybody needs a place to operate. Particularly in Houston, people tend to. There's a lot of manufacturing, or more than manufacturing, conversion. A lot of they're buying threaded rod or just bar and having to cut it and thread it. So there is a fairly decent demand of these smaller guys that need to leave some space and then quickly, as they grow, find larger space.
And I guess the startups are way more likely to be leasers. Yeah. So you were talking about this trend towards more and more bigger consolidated landlord operations. As I see it's happening in residential too. You hear about BlackRock's holdings. It's like 30% of all residential homes now. It was a figure I saw thrown around. Does that jive with what you hear?
Yeah. I absolutely. These BlackRock and other large institutional landlords, they see a tremendous advantage. And look, I'm a capitalist, so I'm not going to beat them up for what they do, but they know that companies are very unlikely to move. And so unlike apartment dwellers or homeowners, they might move every couple of years. Once a business has set up tons of steel racking, loaded up their bays with pallets of heavy product, or in case of manufacturing, even if you're just cutting bar or threading, making the investment and setting up all that equipment, the landlord knows that you're unlikely to move. That gives them a lot of leverage to raise your rent. And they're constantly, look, some of these are public companies. So Prologis is a public company. You can go read their annual report. They brag to their investors that on average, they've increased their rents 40% to tenants. And so they want to attract investors. That's something they brag about. There's other large landlords. East Group is a large public company. You can read their reports, and they're raising rents. So as a tenant, that's very challenging where your rent goes up 40%. Imagine if your employee costs went up 40% or your cost of product went up 40%. It's very, very impactful.
Yeah, of course. That's where we need an advocate like Cressa to be helping us when we're out there in the market looking for somewhere to go.
Yeah, I mean, We would love to work with anyone, of course. Coming from the fastener industry, I'd love to reconnect with people from the industry. But I encourage people, get professional advice. Get advice, know what your options are. If there's one thing your listeners take away, it's that they should start the lease renewal process as early as possible. I'm working with a company in Houston. They're not a fastener distributor. They're in the oil and gas. They distribute oil and gas products. And initially, they told me, "Look, we're 3 years away from our renewal. We're good. We don't have it." I said, "Well, do you know what rents are going to be in 3 years from now?" First of all, they're 50% higher than your current lease rate. So you're up against a major increase to operating expenses. Wouldn't you want help in knowing what your options are? And so they agree that there's no harm in getting advice. The weird thing, Eric, about my business is we don't get paid by our clients. So if we get hired by a tenant, we get paid by the landlord. Just if you've ever bought a home, you've hired a real estate agent to represent you, you know that they get paid by the seller of the home. Similarly, there's no risk to our clients to get our advice. They could fire us anytime, but we get paid by the landlord. That's neither here nor there. The point is we work with companies to come up with a strategy. And the biggest strategy is starting early, looking at options. And there's a little bit of poker playing here is to bluff and have your landlord worried about you potentially moving. So they know that if you call them up 3 months before your lease expires, you're not going to interrupt your business. You're not going to move out in 3 months. They can double your rent and you really have limited options. If you start 2 years ahead of time, then there are many options. You could build a building. You can maybe buy a building. You can build a building, what's called a build to suit. Maybe you move down the street to a competitive landlord's building. So that's my advice to your listeners, whether they use us or someone else, start the process as early as possible.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I've heard you say that before. Well, strictly speaking, from your perspective, working on spec, I mean, it's a tough way to make a living, but on the other hand, from the client standpoint, they know you're working hard for them and they know you're doing an honest job of it. I I speak from experience in that area, Marco. So, keep it rolling.
Yeah, when you're a professional services company, whether you're an attorney, a doctor, a trusted advisor, your reputation and word of mouth is everything. So even though we're working on spec, as you say, if we don't do a good job for our clients, and then they're likely to either not recommend us or worse, badmouth us. And so luckily, I've been able to use my industry reputation to connect with old colleagues, and those colleagues have been happy to refer me to other people in the industry that could use our services.
And as I said at the top of the conversation, we ran into you multiple times at the various shows. What's on the docket for you? Are we going to see you at any shows upcoming?
I didn't make Vegas this year. Actually, I'm kind of done with Vegas prices. I'm definitely planning to attend the Phoenix IFE show this year.
Right. The Vegas show in Phoenix, we're calling it.
That's right. The Vegas show in Phoenix. I attended another fastener show, the STAFTA show, earlier this year. I was very impressed with the Phoenix Convention Center. So I'm eager to get to Phoenix. And I seem to be, not deliberately, but I seem to have been going every other year to the Fastener Fair show. And so I forgot where it's going to be held this year. Is it Charlotte?
Yep.
Yeah, I was in Charlotte for another event, and I also loved the Charlotte Convention Center. I was very impressed how clean downtown Charlotte was. So I'm looking forward to that event as well.
Well, cool. I'll be seeing you there then. Hey, what was your impression of STAFTA? You mentioned you were there. I heard that there were some big changes after that show that they were announcing.
Well, it's my first time going to STAFTA, so I didn't have a point of comparison. But to repeat the term you used earlier about Portland, it's a ghost town. It seemed like a ghost town. The exhibitors I spoke to were very underwhelmed by the quality and the quantity of attendees. It's not an industry that I particularly am very involved with, specialty tools and such. But I'll say that I'm not planning to return to that show.
Okay. Yeah, it's not a show that I've been heavily involved in either, but I did hear that, and I think big changes are coming with staff. I know their senior management and things turned over a little bit, so I guess we'll stay tuned to that. A few fastener guys do attend that. Well, Marco, what else can we tell the audience about Cressa? Because it's been great talking to you and getting to know you a little bit better here. But if there's a takeaway that you want to leave with listeners, lay it out there.
Well, I talked about the one takeaway about starting your lease renewal process early. I hate for this to sound like a commercial, but Cressa is growing. When I started the company with the company in 2024, we had about 50 offices across the country. Today, we're about 62. And we provide services like project management. So not only do we put tenants into the right spaces, whether it's office buildings or distribution centers, we also have project managers on staff, which will help outfit those buildings, build out what's called tenant improvement offices or other construction projects. When there's large investments, so we've talked to some overseas manufacturers, we work with state and federal governments to find incentive dollars to attract companies to those locations, and we're national. So if someone calls me and they said they'd like to go to Florida, I'd work with them and we'd use our local office. So we had on-the-street intelligence or feet-on-the-street intelligence and work with our national team to see if there were eligible tax incentive dollars for new jobs or investments. One thing the current administration has done is made it more attractive for overseas companies to invest in our country. And so there's quite a bit of money available that not everyone's familiar with.
That's an interesting angle. Okay, well, so you've got a lot of market intel in that area too, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I have to be truthful. More than me, I have a tremendous team. We've got thousands of employees and really, really smart people. If you were counting solely on my knowledge, I wouldn't offer much. But luckily, I've got a vast wealth of smarter people behind me.
You know where to get it.
That's right. That's right.
All right, Marco. Last question for you. We were talking at the very top about your love. Let's just face it, your love of Vegemite. But
it's right up there with brisket. They go 1 and 2 on what's my favorite food.
Yeah, well, Brian wouldn't argue with you on that one. But what I was going to say is maybe we could talk to one of your kids about helping us out with our social media presence and the whole Vegemite push. It sounds like they'd be great at that.
My kids. We started early, so my kids are adults. I've got one. The youngest is a freshman in high school. I think what you need is a teenager. You need a TikToker that could do the fancy editing and
exactly
with subtitles and the quick cuts. But I'm telling you, I think that would be a hit. If you could somehow capture people's facial expression after tasting that, I'm sure it'd be the talk of the next show you're in.
All right, we'll talk about it further in Charlotte. What do you say?
I'd love it. Love it. Looking forward to it.
All right, Marco. We've been talking with Marco Rodriguez. He's with Cressa. He's your fastener commercial real estate guy. He's the voice that you've been hearing on Fully Threaded Radio lately, and sure do appreciate you joining me today.
Eric, I long before I worked at Cressa, I've been a listener of FTR, and so, believe it or not, I'm always picking up something.
Appreciate that. We'll talk to you soon.
Fully Threaded Radio is a production of Fasteners Clearinghouse.